It's a new day at One Jets Drive as the New York Jets have officially hired Aaron Glenn to be their next head coach. Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd. This is episode 476 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. At the time of this recording, we are just 3 subscribers away from hitting 500. Of course, thank you to those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms as well. A breaking news episode. After a long search, the New York Jets have found their guy, and Aaron Glenn returns to the New York Jets, this time as a head coach. We all know, obviously, his playing days, also spent some time as a scout, but he is now back, and he's back in the highest role at the helm, head coach. We'll talk more about the GM here in a little bit. No hire there. Expected to still go through more second round of interviews. We'll discuss that a little bit later on, but it's the start of a new day. It's the start of a new regime here, especially from a head coaching perspective, as we still wait on the general manager news with Aaron Glenn. And where there's smoke, there's fire. We knew this was coming for a while, especially over the last couple days. Things really started to heat up with the in-person interview yesterday. You started to hear, a lot more reports about Aaron Glenn's interest in the Jets job, the Jets' interest in Aaron Glenn. And really, this all goes back to the whole Mike Vrabel thing. Once Mike Vrabel took over in New England, it was pretty clear it was only a matter of time, not if, but more so when, that Aaron Glenn would get hired. And with the Lions losing on Saturday night in the divisional round against the Commanders, the process got accelerated much quicker than many expected with the early playoff exit. And they make this move now on Wednesday with him having the ability to then interview in person. So where there's smoke, there's fire. This shouldn't come as anybody's surprise. We all knew this was coming for a while. Again, especially over the last 24 to 48 hours where things really ramped up. And you guys know where I stand on Aaron Glenn, right? He was not my top choice. I preferred a guy with experience. I preferred a guy that was previously a head coach, that was been there, done that, proven track record. I was open to interviewing some candidates that they never even interviewed. That I would have preferred. But that doesn't mean that we can all of a sudden just write Aaron Glenn off now as a bust of a head coach. It doesn't mean that we can all of a sudden say he's Todd Bowles all over again or Robert Saleh 2.0 all over again. Aaron Glenn is still a qualified candidate that does deserve an opportunity as a head coach. And as a Jet fan, you've got to hope that they finally get it right. You've got to hope. Aaron Glenn is totally different. He's his own candidate. He is his own person. And he gets this opportunity. And ideally, he has learned from previous people's mistakes here. Ideally, he brings different attributes than those guys brought. He was just in Detroit where he saw a first-time guy in Dan Campbell take over and turn that franchise around. He also wanted this job. I don't think many people recognize that as well. He was a former Jet who saw this turnaround happen as a player. He was here during the Kotite days, was also here during Bill Parcells' days, played from 94 to 2001 with the team, an all-time great New York Jet. He saw the turnaround from a player's perspective. He has now worked his way up the ranks, coach or a scout to coaching, positional coach to defensive coordinator to now head coach. He has worked his way up, well-respected around the NFL. Bill Parcells has spoke highly, got that connection. Sean Payton, from his days in New Orleans, has spoke highly of him. And this is also a guy that, unlike many other candidates, wants the New York Jets. He wants to coach this team. He loves this organization. He has said that for the last couple years now. Of course, a report came out last week from the New York Post reassuring that want from Aaron Glenn to coach this organization. So I'm not just going to sit here and say, sure, do you have concerns? Yeah. But I'm not just going to sit here today. You've got to buy in. You've got to believe. We all got to hope that this hire is the right one and that this pans out. You'd rather be happy and wrong than miserable and correct, in my eyes. And to be honest, I didn't hate Glenn as much as many other people. Out of the candidates that the Jets interviewed, Glenn was my number 2. It was Brian Flores, Aaron Glenn. So out of the candidates that they interviewed, he was my number 2. I think it's valuable. I think there's something to say there that he wanted this job. He played for this organization. He understands this market. He has seen 2 major turnarounds happen from a playing perspective and a coaching perspective. I think there's something there with that he saw the Jets turn around. He was a player here. He saw Bill Parcells turn this organization around as a player. Ideally, he takes experience from that and brings it into this opportunity. I think one of the most crucial things is he was with Detroit since 2021. Dan Campbell brought him in as the defensive coordinator. And this is a guy that Dan Campbell, nobody liked that hire. I mean, his first press conference, biting kneecaps and all that stuff. People were trolling the Lions, same old Lions, all that stuff. And look what's happened. He has completely turned that organization around. And what's so important, I think, about the whole Dan Campbell thing is he saw a first-time guy go into an organization that is full of failure. The Lions, historically, up until the last really 2 years, 3 years more so, have been nothing but an unmitigated disaster, similar to the Jets. And a first-time coach and a first-time general manager as well, and Brad Holmes, went in there and have cleaned that place up and have completely turned that organization around. Completely turned it around. And I think something there's something, again, there for Aaron Glenn, where he saw Dan Campbell go about his day-to-day business as a first-time head coach, turning around a losing organization, an organization full of losing. And he also saw it with the Jets turn around with Parcells. And you've got to believe and you've got to hope that he takes those experience, wanting to be a Jet. He's always talked about his love for the organization, wanting this job, wanting this opportunity, taking those experiences, learning from Dan Campbell, also understanding, too, probably a little bit of what has gone wrong with the previous first-time head coaches here and how he can be different from those guys. And in the long run, make this the right hire. Be that CEO type coach. Be a guy that not only holds players accountable, but coaches accountable as well. And I also think something that's very pivotal about this whole Aaron Glenn thing and this Aaron Glenn hire is the fact that he needs experience on his staff, especially his offensive staff, the side of the ball that he hasn't coached, of course, coming as a defensive coordinator. I think you're going to get a very good idea of what to expect from Aaron Glenn based on his staff. And I think early signs here, some of the names that we've seen throw out there, you've at least got to be happy about. Glenn needs experience on his staff. He needs guys that can kind of help him through, right? Sean McVay, I have always brought up this comparison. Sean McVay, when he took over in LA as a first-time OC, taking over that job, right? He had Wade Phillips as his defensive coordinator. Wade Phillips, of course, a guy with so much football and NFL experience, a head coach a couple of times. McVay had Wade Phillips as his defensive coordinator on the side of the ball that he wasn't strong with. He had Wade Phillips there as his DC, a guy that could help him, kind of mentor him. Glenn needs that on this staff. The biggest problem with Robert Saleh, the biggest issue with him was his offensive staff and really his defensive staff now. Once he got fired, you started to see some of the holes on the defensive staff, right? I think Ulbrich was more of a product of Robert Saleh, right? But that was the problem. Saleh was so focused on the defense, his offensive staff was incompetent that it all blew up in his face. And Aaron Glenn can't have that. Aaron Glenn needs to learn from that. Aaron Glenn needs to recognize that. You need experience on this staff. That's number one. That's the biggest thing. And we'll read down some of the staff guys that potentially could bring in rumored guys already. But still, there's notion around the fan base already counting him off, already calling him, Saleh or Bowles 2.0, all these guys. It's just not fair. Glenn's his own candidate. He's got a different background than all those other guys. And I will also, again, I mentioned this earlier, and this is probably my third time, right? I do think there is truly something about that he was a former Jet. He saw this thing turn around. He understands this market, and he wanted this job. I think that's something that that's flying over a lot of people's heads, is that he wanted this job, right? Not many guys want the Jets. There aren't many, right? That was the whole talking point at the beginning of all of this. If we all remember when Rex Ryan was publicly campaigning for the Jets head coach job, right? We were all saying if everything fails, it might be Rex because he might be the only one that wants to come here. Glenn wanted this job. And I think there's truly something about that can hopefully lead to some success. That this is a massive opportunity for him. He's got the respect of the organization from his playing days, the market, all that stuff. And we'll see what the staff is like. Again, there are concerns, no doubt, but there are also things about Aaron Glenn that you can be excited about, that you can hopefully, I guess, kind of rally around a little bit. I think, again, it's important that he's coming from a team where he just saw a first-time head coach turn around a losing organization. I know Dan Campbell was the intern for, 12 games with the Dolphins back in 2015, I believe. That doesn't really count. You talk about a guy laying a foundation, being a head coach. It was Dan Campbell's first time. The guy was mainly just a tight ends coach. He was a nobody. And also, Dan Campbell played for the Lions. He had that connection. He played for the organization. He wanted that job. Look how it panned out. Aaron Glenn played for the organization, wanted this job. You got to give the guy a chance. It's just crazy. As some of these Jet fans, you hear some of these Jet fans out there that are saying, oh, he's, they're not going to root for the team if they hire Glenn. It's ridiculous. He's different than those other guys. And you've got to hope that it works out and it pans out. And there's things that Glenn brings to the table that you've got to be excited about, like I mentioned, and the staff's going to be important. All those things are going to be crucial. Also, look at the division, right? Sean McDermott was a first-time DC with Buffalo. It panned out. So you've got to hope and rally around Glenn and hope that it fits and it works and he hires a good staff and they make this thing work. And they are able to turn this thing around. And this time next year, we're talking about playoffs as opposed to a 4 or 5 win season where, okay, now all in on year 2. Because I think that's also crucial too. Aaron Glenn and this staff, they've got to recognize there's no more rebuilds. Don't take forever. This should be something that with the roster, the talent on this roster and the potential, let's say, if Rodgers bringing Rodgers back. I will actually admit, we'll see how Glenn views Rodgers, and those are all questions I'm sure we'll get in the introductory press conference. But the whole Rodgers thing too, I actually think you can maybe make a stronger case now for Rodgers returning, just because of the fact that a first-time head coach with a rookie or Tyrod or a quarterback like that, it might not actually hurt, even though Rodgers isn't the same. And you do have some concerns about Rodgers and just his whole locker room, all that stuff. There are concerns there. I've been I've mentioned that a lot on this podcast. You do wonder if maybe it is best for Rodgers to potentially return just because it's a rookie head coach and the chance to be competitive right away. Rodgers probably gives you that best shot, but those will all be conversations we talk about down the road. So just some things here on Aaron Glenn and some other stuff. So here are some reports about Aaron Glenn and his potential rumored staff that we've got already. Some names I really potentially like on here. We'll also name some others that aren't on this list. But Steve Wilks as his defensive coordinator, that feels like it's going to happen. Nothing official, but Steve Wilks, Mark Brunell, former Jet, backup, of course, 2010, 2011, has been the Lions quarterbacks coach since 2021. He's a name to look for. He's also a name to maybe look for as the Lions OC vacancy. So we'll see some of those Lions, some of the Lions staff and some of these other names are looking, could have other teams involved as well. But we've also heard reports that Aaron Glenn has already started to really build his staff and talk to different guys, and it feels like there's a pretty good foundation being laid there. Chris Banjo potentially as a special teams coach. Bears interim head coach Thomas Brown, who just spent the last season as their interim. Former Chiefs, he would be on the offensive side. Former Chiefs head coach Todd Haley as a potential staff addition. And this bottom one brings back a lot of memories for us Jets fans, and that's Mike Westhoff. Was, of course, with the team as special teams coach from 2001 to 2012. Mike Westhoff, to me, would be a home run hire on this staff. Not even just maybe as a special teams coach, whether they want to go maybe Chris Banjo or even Darren Rizzi's an option, but just even as like an assistant head coach or something like that, Mike Westhoff, I think, would be huge for a guy like Aaron Glenn. Westhoff's got the Jets connection, well-respected around the league, could be really somebody that can mentor and help Glenn. He has experience going all the way back to the 70s. His first NFL gig came in 1982 with the Colts. I mean, this is a guy that's got a ton of experience, especially in this organization. I think that could be a crucial hire for Glenn. Steve Wilks is a guy, has head coaching experience, both as a head coach and an intern. Two big hires, I think, there, if you're talking about experience and guys that can help him through the day-by-day stuff, where he can kind of trust his staff, take his hands off, and really focus on just being a head coach. Because that's the biggest problem with Saleh. He turned into a defensive coordinator that just answers questions. That's what it was. Glenn can't do that. And I think you'll get a pretty good idea early on of if that's going to work out. Just some other names. Kelvin Shepard. He's the linebackers coach right now with the Lions. He's in the running for maybe that Detroit DC job to take over for Glenn. The Bears maybe as well with Ben Johnson. So we'll see, but he's a name to look for. Nick Caley's another one as a possible OC. Scott Turner, possible OC as well. Clint Kubiak is a big one, a name to look for. He is in the running for the Seattle job. Was the OC with the Saints this year, was also the Vikings OC in 2021. He's an intriguing name. Hank Fraley, also in the running for the Seattle job, has been the Lions offensive line coach since 2020 as an offensive staff. Somebody to just look for. A name I really like, but this was more so if they went the Lance Newmark route, would be Anthony Lynn. He's the running backs coach right now for Washington. Now, Lynn wouldn't be my top pick for offensive coordinator, but if they were to bring him here and maybe have him as like the run game coordinator and then potentially assistant head coach or something like that, put him into one extra role, I think could be beneficial because previous head coach with experience on that offensive staff, right, was the Chargers head coach from 2017 to 2020. I think that could be beneficial. The only reason I don't know so much about Anthony Lynn right now, it was more so just a thought, but he has more so the connections from Lance Newmark. He was the OC in 2021. So he does, I guess, have that connection the 1 year with Glenn, with the Lions. But he's also Washington's run game coordinator this year in 2024. So basically followed Newmark from Detroit, went to Detroit. Newmark was there, then went to Washington this year. Newmark's there as the assistant GM. So Anthony Lynn, to me, feels like maybe somebody more that would happen if Newmark was hired, which isn't happening. I thought I think a lot of people thought they would probably be a package deal. That's not the case. We'll get to the GM stuff in a second, but those are all potential staff hires. We mentioned Mark Brunell, also a former player, played for, backup for the Jets, so understands the organization, the market, all that stuff. They're in the sexy Rexy Hard Knocks days. If you remember, Mark Sanchez would always, joking around about his age and all that stuff on some of those Hard Knocks clips, some of those episodes going back with Mark Brunell. Mike Westhoff. The biggest thing, as I mentioned, I might have mentioned this already, maybe not. Sorry if I'm all over the place, but Mike Westhoff, he did retire this year with the Broncos due to health concerns. So he was with the Broncos the last 2 years, 2023 and into this year as an assistant head coach, but retired due to health concerns. He's getting up there in age. So Westhoff would only be if he wants to come out of retirement, if he feels like he can come out of retirement. 77 years old, who knows? But clearly there's an interest there from Glenn. And I think Westhoff and some of these other guys would be home run hires just because of their previous experience. It's imperative that Glenn gets guys in here that can help him, right? Biggest problem, we'll say it all the time. Biggest problem. What did, right? Or even if you're like high offensive coordinator, offensive staff, you've got to have some experience. Even if it's not so much coming, even if it's the offensive coordinator is not a former head coach or all that stuff, you have to have somewhat of head coaching experience on either side of the ball. DC and Steve Wilkes, if that's that, fine. You need a guy. We talk about all the time. The biggest thing that killed Saleh was his staff, and mainly his inexperience in his staff. Glenn can't have that. So some of the names there. There's a lot of names. There's a lot of guys that haven't even been mentioned that have been brought up for possible Aaron Glenn. There's also some guys that are in the running for other jobs with OCs elsewhere. Seattle's OC job is a big one. So that could potentially take away some of these names. Clint Kubiak's in the running for that. Hank Fraley, I also believe, is in the running for that. So we'll see how all that plays out. The Lions OC and DC jobs as well have some say in this. Hank Fraley might become the Lions OC. You also have Kelvin Shepard might become the Lions DC. So what happens with all those positions? There's still a lot of dust that needs to settle until we really find the answers there. But some of the potential staffs there for Aaron Glenn. I'll also throw this one out here as well. General manager report. So the Jets did not hire a general manager today, unlike we thought. So this is from Tom Pelissero. With the Jets finalizing their expected deal with Aaron Glenn to be their head coach, the team now plans to proceed to additional second interviews for their GM job per sources. Lance Newmark was in the building with Glenn on Monday, and others remain under consideration. I believe he means Tuesday because they were visiting yesterday. But either way, we know they've been in person over the last day or so. Glenn gets hired. Newmark does not. I still wouldn't be surprised if Newmark gets hired, although the fact that he was in the building yesterday, if they really liked him and him and Glenn had that close relationship, you feel like they probably would have just gotten that deal done. But they obviously didn't. I still wouldn't rule Newmark out. They still want to interview other guys, although we've also heard reports that they've started to call head coaches and GMs to let them know they're out of the running. So how many names really do they have left on their GM list? I mean, it's a long list, so there's probably still names left. But I think you've still got to keep an eye on guys like Alec Hallaby, assistant GM with the Eagles right now. Mike Greenberg's a name to still keep an eye on. John Eric Sullivan's still a name to keep an eye on. Look, I don't love the idea of going coach first, then GM. But, if obviously Glenn's going to have some say, I'd prefer go GM, head coach, or Newmark and Glenn both at one time. But it feels like maybe they weren't totally sold on Newmark, which I'm not really surprised. Newmark is kind of not saying that he's a terrible candidate, but I do think there's better candidates out there. Newmark wasn't that high on my list. first-time guy. Maybe they look for experience. Who knows? Maybe Glenn prefers experience at general manager, somebody to pair with him as opposed to a first-time GM as well. Who knows? We'll see. But a little bit riskier, hiring a GM or a head coach first than a GM, unless if they already kind of know, or they are just going to hire Newmark, but they want to interview 2 other guys just to see anyway. Who knows? But the GM thing is still going on. But I do think there's a lot of this that just is like, Glenn really wanted the Jets really wanted Glenn. Just hammer this out, and they got that deal done. And you hope it works. That's all you can say. Said it earlier. Not going to be the one to just sit here. I don't think any Jet fan should be the one that just sits here and says it's not going to work automatically. Yeah, there's certainly concerns, but it doesn't mean that he's his own candidate. He's got a different track record than some of these other guys, well respected around the league, and ideally, this works out. And he learns from Dan Campbell and what he was able to do. He saw a turnaround with the Jets. He kind of sees and understands what has taken place here the last couple times they've done this and how he can be different than those guys. And I think that starts with hiring an experienced staff. You've seen a lot of players buying in already on social media, which I think is definitely a positive. Guy's going to hold guys accountable, hopefully. Need to be that CEO type coach. And hopefully that's the guy. You just got to hope and buy in and believe that Aaron Glenn can finally get this thing turned around. That's all. That's all you can do. I'll also say this too, I do think Saleh at times, who here might end up getting the Jacksonville job, but I do think Saleh at times, one of the things that actually hurt Saleh more than helped him was his defensive expertise. In a way, I do feel like he's a very good defensive coordinator, very good X's and O's defensively. And I do feel at sometimes that actually hurt Saleh more than it helped him. Because I do feel sometimes Saleh, knowing that defense was his expertise, and he felt sometimes too much of a need to get his hands on that defense. And I think that hurt him. That's where he kind of turned back into just being a defensive coordinator. I think Glenn, I don't think is as X's and O's. He's a good defensive coordinator, but I don't think he's a great defensive coordinator. I think more with Glenn, hopefully you get more of that leader of men motivational guy that isn't so X's and O's defensively and can more rely on his staff to do that. If that makes sense, I do feel sometimes that actually plagued Saleh, was he was so X's and O's, so heavy on defense and doing it his way that sometimes that hurt him. And I think Glenn maybe is a little bit different, where he's more of that, going to hold my guys accountable. I'm going to have them ready to play. They're going to be ready. They're going to play for me, all that stuff. Maybe not as much X's and O's type guy, not as much defensive expertise. And I think that maybe helps him, where he doesn't feel the need like Saleh did to kind of get his nose so much in on the defensive side of the football, more so just be, again, we're asking him to be a head coach. And that's my whole thing I said with the Commanders game. The people were like, don't hire Glenn. Whether you wanted Glenn or didn't want Glenn, that Commanders game shouldn't have meant anything, because you're not hiring him to be a defensive coordinator. Let's make that very clear. You are not hiring him to be a defensive coordinator. You're hiring him to be a head coach, to oversee the offense, to oversee the defense, to oversee the special teams. That's what you're hiring him to do. So want to make that clear here too at the end, because I've seen that pop up a couple times. So Aaron Glenn is here, new head coach of the New York Jets. Officially, we now wait to see where the general manager search stands. We'll have a lot more content coming your way in the coming days here as we await the GM and we continue to break down Glenn and his staff and all that good stuff. Glenn wanted the Jets wanted Glenn, and the former player is back to where it all started for him. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below about this move. And do you like it? Don't like it? In the middle? Love it? Where are you? What are your thoughts? Thoughts on the GM search as well, and any other Jets takes you've got down below. Appreciate you all. Make sure to please like and subscribe. Again, just 3 subs away from 500 at the time of this recording. Would love to hit that here very, very soon. So stay tuned. A lot more content coming your way. Until next time, JETS, 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 Jets. Welcome to New York, Aaron Glenn.